Being our last press conference, I guess we're going to start just where we started with our first one about a year ago, talking about impeachment. You watched what transformed last night on this floor. It's something that we've said all the time. The weakest, the thinnest, the fastest impeachment in U.S. history. Schumer even admitted, trying to ask for more witnesses, that what happened on this floor over here was wrong. Now we have the own Speaker of the House who is so embarrassed she admits the failure of this impeachment that she will not even send it to the Senate. So embarrassed that I watched in her press conference she wouldn't even take your questions. That is not a good legacy to have. She's admitting defeat by not sending it. By refusing to send the impeachment over, she knows this outcome is not good. She knows the facts are not there. There's no basis for it. At the end of the day, the American public needs to move on.
Since you brought up Nancy Pelosi's legacy, do you worry about your legacy defending a man who suggested last night that John Dingell might be in hell, attacked a 16-year-old girl last week, said she has anger management problems? Is it difficult to defend a man who talks like this?
Your question to me is, am I worried about my legacy? No. Am I worried about my legacy of standing up for the Constitution that it is not impeachable what the president did? The question before me as a member of Congress, is that impeachable? Even, which I would consider probably the most respected constitutional scholar, someone who's not a Republican, a Democrat, Jonathan Turley even said, the only abuse that was moving forward was the Democrats, that there was no bribery, there was no obstruction, and that's the job that I have. Will I be embarrassed the fact that I just served for a year in Congress and the record of this Congress is more subpoenas than laws? I'm embarrassed that this is the Congress that did that. I'm embarrassed that this Congress promised to be different and they haven't. I'm embarrassed that this Congress designed their entire time, from selecting of their committee chairs, from the freshmen on their first day, to Adam Schiff, with only one goal of impeaching the president. When they moved to that impeachment, going against everything and every fear that Alexander Hamilton had, that the animosities would be so great that they'd use their own political raw power to do something different, and they did it, and now they're so embarrassed that they wouldn't send it over to the Senate? Yeah, I'm embarrassed about that.
A record number of Republican retirements over this Congress and the last, including Mark Meadows today. What does that say to you about the health of your party?
Health of our party is very strong. Let's talk about that. Last Congress, when we had retirements, I was sad about that. I wish we didn't have as many. I wish Congressman Poe did not retire. I'd never met a man named Dan Crenshaw before, but this new, young Navy SEAL, who's now probably the strongest Republican on social media talking about policies and ideas. It's healthy. And for those who are afraid about Republican retirements, I would not be. If you take the average of the retirements based upon where, if you look at the president's votes and others, it's an R23. A Republican's going to replace Mark Meadows. I wish Mark Meadows would stay. He's been a great member. But from the same point of when you look back, the thing about the Republican Party, we don't believe this should be your entire life. Like, I watched Steny Hoyer, and he's a dear friend of mine, but he said in his speech the other day that he's been here 38 years. I don't think that's what our founders designed or thought of. And with the Republican Party, we're healthy, and we bring new blood in. And what's happening with a lot of retirements when you look across, and in 2010, I happened to be the recruitment chair. And remember, in 2010 is when Republicans defeated 63 Democrat incumbents. If you measure us today of where we are as a party on those who are running for office, we have more than 100 more than we had then. We have more women Republicans running for Congress than any time in the history of the Republican Party, from veterans and others. And so we're stronger than you and I. And if you sit today, I watched Speaker Pelosi said, what she had? She had a step in her, or a jump in her, swing in her step. That may be true because her conference is going to be a little lighter and a little smaller, and the Republicans is going to be stronger after today. So if you're asking me about the party and you're asking about retirements, Republicans are going to replace. I think the question of Speaker Pelosi, when she started this impeachment, she promised her own members that the public would be for it. Well, we found that not to be the case. She promised that they'd be stronger, they're going to be smaller. We're the stronger conference after it. I just don't find that any of this was healthy in any aspect that you measure it. It definitely is not healthy for our government, but it's definitely not healthy for America itself around the world.
Question, if you could respond to an earlier question about can you defend Trump's remarks about the late John Dingell, but my question, would be this week federal prosecutors revealed that Lev Parnas, Giuliani's indicted associate, received $1 million, came up during his bail hearing. As you know, some of Lev Parnas's money was sent to your committee, you donated it. Can you respond to both the development in the SDNY prosecution, what that means for now the linking of Dmitry Firtash, the oligarch, to Parnas, and what that means for the investigation?
I don't know. The investigation will continue to go forward. I thought you were going to refer to, when you said what happened this week, I thought you were going to refer to the judge based upon what happened with the FISA court and the FBI spying on the campaign. That was a great concern to me as well. Question to John Dingell. I knew John Dingell, I knew Debbie Dingell. I served with them both. I think they were very good individuals. I think they John served his country very well, very proud. When John passed away, if you watched on the floor and you heard my speech on the floor, and contribute to him, and I find him very strong individual, very bright individual. And I think he made a great contribution to America. We may differ philosophically and sometimes in principles, but no, I considered him a friend.
Now that the House has voted on articles of impeachment, what will House Republicans' role, in the Senate be? Are you planning on having some of your members prep the Senate as they prepare for an eventual trial, or what will that look like?
We will do anything senators need if they want information. If they need it, we have a lot of members that spend a lot of time on this. But that's up to the Senate and also up to the president who he wants to represent him. But anything that we can be helpful, we will.
Consider last night's House Republicans' defeat kind of a failure to the party?
A defeat. Well, let me first gauge that. I would feel it was a defeat to the Constitution. That the rise of impeachment would become so low that you didn't read the Constitution to take it. I'd consider it a defeat in the idea that we didn't hold the same standard that the Speaker asked us to hold in March of this year, at least at that time. That impeachment was so divisive that it'd have to be overwhelming, compelling, and bipartisan. When I watched last night, the only bipartisan vote was against impeachment. A Democrat who's actually running for president voted present. So the question you probably wanted to ask was to the Speaker. Unfortunately, she would not take any questions when it came to impeachment. I would think if Nancy Pelosi thought impeachment was so important, that she had to put this before the American public, that she wrote a timeline, that she selected committee chairmen based upon in the future, that she spent 2.5 years working on this, the press conference the day after impeachment that she has weekly, I thought she would have welcomed questions about impeachment. Unfortunately, she told you they were Republican talking points and she would not take your questions. I never thought a speaker would act that way. I guess the only thing I could take from that, she's embarrassed of it. She understands how weak it is, and she understands her own criteria was not met, constitutionally was not met. She probably failed on all parts.
USMCA set to pass today. The Speaker argued that Democrats deserve some credit for strengthening the product over time, for improving the enforcement mechanisms. Do you think that the final product that's going to pass is stronger than what initially came out? And how would you summarize the way that the negotiations have taken place over the last several months?
Well, you started by saying the Speaker believes the Democrats need some credit for bringing USMCA up. The only reason USMCA was brought up is because they impeached the president. So if she thinks the credit belongs for impeaching the president is why she brought USMCA up, I'll let her have that credit. But the credit for the bill itself, no. What did she talk about? Less than 1% of the overall bill. I don't think it's better. It actually put doubt into some people of whether they would vote for it. USMCA talks about United States, Mexico, and Canada. Mexico is our #1 trader. Canada is #2. A lot of you have been reporting for the last year of our debate with China and trying to come to an agreement with China. China happens to be our #3 trader. If you were going to go into a negotiation with China, you'd want to be the strongest possible ability, right? So would you think passing USMCA a year ago when the president came to that agreement would make us a little stronger with our negotiations with China? Yeah, everybody in the world does. But Nancy Pelosi had the power as Speaker not to bring it up. Why? Because it didn't meet the timeline. She wrote a timeline of when she wanted to impeach the president in the last week that we are here. But she didn't want that to be the last vote. She had to have one other vote. So she held USMCA up, which only made our negotiations with China put us in a weaker position. So we got our first phase of agreement with China. We probably could have gotten it all if we were stronger with our first and second traders. So I don't know what credit she wants to take because she only harmed us by holding it. If she wants to try to spin it in some manner, with you're only negotiating 1% of the bill, I don't know how much credit you can take. America will be stronger because of USMCA. Presidents before have promised they would renegotiate this after 25 years. But only one president was able to accomplish it, President Trump. If you want to take, okay, let's look at the floor and let's see who should get the credit. Well, I took and I looked at every time the USMCA was brought up on the floor in the last year. You want to know what the percentages are? 91% of the time that USMCA was brought up to bring up to a bill and talked about was from the Republican side of the aisle. 9% from the Democrats. So I think history will tell who gets the credit. I'm just very proud of our members for never giving up, for continuing to put pressure. But the greatest pressure that finally changed the Speaker's mind was the impeachment, because she did not want to go home with that being the final vote. She's so embarrassed by it, she won't even send the papers over. She's so embarrassed by that, she won't even take your questions. Why will she release the papers? I never thought I'd see a Speaker take that position, but I guess that's where we live today. I never thought we'd see a House doing the things that Alexander Hamilton feared the most.
Have you spoken any more to Congressman Jeff Van Drew about him moving over to the Republican Party? And how do you feel about, welcoming a new member whose record doesn't exactly line up with Republicans?
Republicans are a very big tent. We're excited to have Jeff Van Drew. We welcome anybody who believes this new Democrat Socialist Party has left them behind. If you want to say what's welcoming, why is he leaving the Democratic Party? There's many times in the past that members from either side of the aisle have left their party to go to the other. But I can't remember a time that somebody left from a majority party to join the minority party. So that question that you raised to me and the premise of it really should be asked to the Democrats. How can you be excited if you started this whole process thinking the outcome would be better and your own conference got smaller because of it? It showed the differences. It shows you're not welcoming, and also shows you cannot have a difference of opinion. When you watched the body language on the floor last night, you watched those 31 Democrats who sat in seats that President carried. Their shoulders were down, their head was down. They were not proud of what they were in. It was almost like the pressure was too great for them. They felt the pressure inside the chambers from their own conference greater than the pressure of the constituents back home of who they said they would listen to. They've watched it inside their town halls and others. Many of them promised before they even got here that they would not vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. They broke that promise right away because that promise of those 2.5 years to impeach the president was too great. Many of them would say that they did not want to impeach the president. That's not why they came here. But the chairman of the Committee of Impeachment, Judiciary, was selected based upon that fact. The congressman they selected to represent the 2 articles of impeachment inside the Rules Committee 2 days before the president was inaugurated, said he was going to impeach the president. The freshmen who now pretty much control the floor for the Democratic side, who gave them the majority, on the day of being sworn in, a few hours later, said they wanted to impeach the mother. So I guess that much of pressure outweighed to these 31s their own constituents. But the difference is 11 months from now, the constituents will have a voice. For all the frustration I see, this is still the greatest form of government because the people have the power. Second question.
Yesterday was sandwiched in between 2 pretty bipartisan major votes this week, the spending bill, which had both bipartisan opposition and bipartisan support, and USMCA today. The Democrats say that shows that what they have said all along, that they can walk and chew gum at the same time, that they can hold the president accountable while also legislating. Do you think that it shows that there can be some bipartisan cooperation despite all of what has been hanging over Congress over the last several months?
There could be a lot of bipartisan support, but let's just take your question. we had bipartisan bills on the floor, a spending bill. When was the spending bill due? How many times did you have to do a continuing resolution before the pressure of Christmas coming, before the pressure of the troops not getting their pay raise? I don't think that's bipartisan. I think that's a failure in their job. Bipartisan, you become a new majority. You promise that you'll be different. They never passed a budget. Bipartisanship, we started at the very beginning, concerned about prescription drugs. So we had 3 bills that would lower the price of drugs, come out of Energy and Commerce, with every Republican and every Democrat voting for it. But there was one person that had the power to change the bill, not in committee, but surely by herself, the Speaker. She changed the bill before it came to the floor to make sure it wasn't bipartisan, to make sure it could not become law. USMCA, you say, is going to be bipartisan. It will. We've waited 1 year for it to come to the floor. Why? Why would they put them all this week? It's interesting, you even used the word sandwich. Could it be they had a timeline? Could it be that they waited for the impeachment? Could it be that they could not have the votes for USMCA unless they promised to impeach the president? Could it be those who sit in the districts that President Trump carried that wanted USMCA had to pledge a vote for impeachment to get USMCA come up? I don't know. That would be a question for the Speaker, but I guess she doesn't take your questions on certain subjects. It's only the ones that she wants to talk about. It's interesting for an elected official to have that answer.
The decision to not hand over the articles to the Senate right away, does that have any precedent, or does it raise any constitutional questions?
I don't think she has the constitutionality to keep them. To me, it's about admitting guilt. But then again, she just makes the rules up as she goes. Remember, we did not use the standards that we used for President Nixon or Clinton. She changed all that. We did not use the standards that the Constitution tells us about impeachment. We changed it for that. We did not use the standards that the Speaker laid out to us in March. She changed it after that. It's an embarrassment. And I don't think the American public will sit back and take it.
Last night, House Democrats finally did what they had decided to do a long time ago. They voted to impeach President Trump. Over the last 12 weeks, House Democrats have conducted the most rushed, least thorough, and most unfair impeachment inquiry in modern history. Now, their slapdash process has concluded in the first purely partisan presidential impeachment since the wake of the Civil War. The opposition to impeachment was bipartisan. Only one part of one faction wanted this outcome. The House's conduct risks deeply damaging the institutions of American government. This particular House of Representatives has let its partisan rage at this particular president create a toxic new precedent that will echo well into the future. That's what I want to discuss right now. The historic degree to which House Democrats have failed to do their duty and what it will mean for the Senate to do ours. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the fact that Washington Democrats made up their minds to impeach President Trump since before he was even inaugurated. Here's a reporter in April of 2016. Donald Trump isn't even the Republican nominee yet, but impeachment is already on the lips of pundits, newspaper editorials, constitutional scholars, and even a few members of Congress. April 2016. On Inauguration Day, 2017, the headline in the Washington Post, "The campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." That was day one. In April 2017, 3 months into the presidency, a senior House Democrat said, "I'm going to fight every day until he's impeached." That was 3 months into the administration. In December 2017, 2 years ago, Congressman Jerry Nadler was openly campaigning to be the ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, specifically because he was an expert on impeachment. That's the Nadler's campaign to be the top Democrat on Judiciary. This week wasn't even the first time House Democrats have introduced articles of impeachment. It was actually the 7th time. They started less than 6 months after the president was sworn in. They tried to impeach President Trump for being impolite to the press, for being mean to professional athletes, for changing President Obama's policy on transgender people in the military. All of these things were high crimes and misdemeanors, according to Democrats. Now, this wasn't just a few people. Scores of Democrats voted to move forward with impeachment on 3 of those prior occasions. So let's be clear. The House's vote yesterday was not some neutral judgment that Democrats came to with great reluctance. It was the predetermined end of a partisan crusade that began before President Trump was even nominated, let alone sworn in. For the very first time in modern history, we've seen a political faction in Congress promise from the moment a president election ended that they would find some way to overturn it. A few months ago, Democrats' 3-year-long impeachment in search of articles found its way to the subject of Ukraine. House Democrats embarked on the most rushed, least thorough, and most unfair impeachment inquiry in modern history. Chairman Schiff's inquiry was poisoned by partisanship from the outset. Its procedures and parameters were unfair in unprecedented ways. Democrats tried to make Chairman Schiff into a de facto special prosecutor, notwithstanding the fact that he is a partisan member of Congress who'd already engaged in strange and biased behavior. He scrapped precedent to cut the Republican minority out of the process. He denied President Trump the same sorts of procedural rights that houses of both parties had provided to past presidents of both parties. President Trump's counsel could not participate in Chairman Schiff's hearings, present evidence, or cross-examine witnesses. The House Judiciary Committee's crack at this was even more ahistorical. It was like the Speaker called up Chairman Nadler and ordered one impeachment. Rush delivered, please. The committee found no facts on its own, did nothing to verify the Schiff report. Their only witnesses were liberal law professors and congressional staffers. So, Mr. President, there's a reason. The impeachment inquiry that led to President Nixon's resignation required about 14 months of hearings, 14 months, in addition to a special prosecutor's investigation. With President Clinton, the independent counsel's inquiry had been underway literally for years before the House Judiciary Committee actually dug in. Mountains of evidence, mountains of testimony from firsthand fact witnesses, serious legal battles to get what was necessary. This time around, House Democrats skipped all of that, spent just 12 weeks. More than a year of hearings for Nixon, multiple years of investigation for Clinton, and they've impeached President Trump in 12 weeks. So let's talk about what the House actually produced in those 12 weeks. House Democrats' rushed and rigged inquiry yielded 2 articles, 2 of impeachment. They are fundamentally unlike any articles that any prior House of Representatives has ever passed. The first article concerns the core events which House Democrats claim are impeachable, the timing of aid to Ukraine. But it does not even purport to allege any actual crime. Instead, they deploy the vague phrase, abuse of power, to impugn the president's action in a general, indeterminate way. Speaker Pelosi's House just gave in to a temptation that every other House in history has managed to resist. Let me say that again. Speaker Pelosi's House just gave in to a temptation that every other House in our history has managed to resist. They impeach a president whom they do not even allege has committed an actual crime known to our laws. They've impeached simply because they disagree with a presidential act and question the motive behind it. So let's look at history. Andrew Johnson impeachment involved around a clear violation of a criminal statute, albeit an unconstitutional statute. Nixon had obstruction of justice, a felony under our laws. Clinton had perjury, also a felony. Now, the Constitution does not say the House can impeach only those presidents who violate a law, but history matters. History matters and precedent matters. And there were important reasons why every previous House of Representatives in American history restrained itself from crossing this Rubicon. The framers of our Constitution very specifically discussed this issue, whether the House should be able to impeach presidents just for, quote, maladministration, In other words, because the House simply thought the president had bad judgment or was doing a bad job. They talked about all this when they wrote the Constitution. The written records of our founders' debates show they specifically rejected this. They realized it would create a total dysfunction to set the bar for impeachment that low, that low. James Madison himself explained that allowing impeachment on that basis would mean the president serves at the pleasure of the Congress instead of the pleasure of the American people. It would make the president a creature of Congress, not the head of a separate and equal branch. So there were powerful reasons, Mr. President, why Congress after Congress for 230 years, required presidential impeachment to revolve around clear, recognizable crimes, even though that was not a strict limitation. Powerful reasons why for 230 years, no House opened the Pandora's box of subjective political impeachments. That 230-year tradition died last night. Now, Mr. President, House Democrats have tried to say they had to impeach President Trump on this historically thin and subjective basis because the White House challenged their request for more witnesses. And that brings us to the second article of impeachment. The House titled this one, Obstruction of Congress. What it really does is impeach the president for asserting presidential privilege. The concept of executive privilege is another 2-century-old constitutional tradition. Presidents, starting with George Washington, have invoked it. Federal courts have repeatedly affirmed it is a legitimate constitutional power. House Democrats requested extraordinary amounts of sensitive information from President Trump's White House, exactly the kinds of things over which presidents of both parties have asserted privilege in the past. Predictably and appropriately, President Trump did not simply roll over. He defended the constitutional authority of his office. No surprise there. It's not a constitutional crisis for a House to want more information than a president wants to give up. That's not a constitutional crisis. It's a routine occurrence. The separation of powers is messy by design. Here's what should have happened. Either the president and Congress negotiate a settlement, or the third branch of government, the judiciary, addresses the dispute between the other two. The Nixon impeachment featured disagreements over presidential privilege, so they went to court. The Clinton impeachment featured disagreements over presidential privilege, so they went to the courts. This takes time. It's inconvenient. That's actually the point. Due process is not meant to maximize the convenience of the prosecutor. It's meant to protect the accused. But this time was different. Remember, 14 months of hearings for Richard Nixon, years of investigation for Bill Clinton, 12 weeks for Donald Trump. Democrats didn't have to rush this, but they chose to stick to their political timetable at the expense of pursuing more evidence through proper legal channels. Nobody made Chairman Schiff do this. He chose to. The Tuesday before last on live television, Adam Schiff explained to the entire country that if House Democrats had let the justice system follow its normal course, they might not have gotten to impeach the president in time for the election. My goodness. In Nixon, the courts were allowed to do their work. In Clinton, the courts were allowed to do their work. Only these House Democrats decided due process is too much work. They'd rather impeach with no proof. Well, Mr. President, they tried to cover for their own partisan impatience by pretending that the routine occurrence of a president exerting constitutional privilege is itself a second impeachable offense. The following is something that Adam Schiff literally said in early October. Here's what he said. Any action that forces us to litigate or to have to consider litigation will be considered further evidence of obstruction of justice. That's Adam Schiff. Here's what the chairman effectively said and what one of his committee members restated just this week. If the president asserts his constitutional rights, it's that much more evidence he's guilty. If the president asserts his constitutional rights, it's that much more evidence he's guilty. That kind of bullying is antithetical to American justice. So those are House Democrats' 2 articles of impeachment. That's all their rushed and rigged inquiry could generate. An act that the House does not even allege is criminal, and a nonsensical claim that exercising a legitimate presidential power is somehow an impeachable offense. Mr. President, this is by far the thinnest basis for any House-passed presidential impeachment in American history. The thinnest and the weakest, and nothing else even comes close. And candidly, I don't think I'm the only person around here who realizes that. Even before the House voted yesterday, Democrats had already started to signal uneasiness with its end product. Before the articles even passed, the Senate Democratic leader went on television to demand that this body redo House Democrats' homework for them, that the Senate should supplement Chairman Schiff's sloppy work so it is more persuasive than Chairman Schiff himself bothered to make it. Of course, every such demand simply confirms that House Democrats have rushed forward with a case that is much too weak. Back in June, Speaker Pelosi promised the House would build an ironclad case. Never mind that she was basically promising impeachment months before the Ukraine events, but that's a separate matter. She promised an ironclad case. And in March, Speaker Pelosi said this: impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there is something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country. End quote. By the Speaker's own standards, the standards she set, she's failed the country. The case is not compelling, not overwhelming, and as a result, not bipartisan. The failure was made clear to everyone earlier this week when Senator Schumer began searching for ways the Senate could step out of our proper role and try to fix the House Democrats' failures for them. And it was made even more clear last night when Speaker Pelosi suggested that House Democrats may be too afraid to even transmit their shoddy work product to the Senate. Mr. President, it looks like the prosecutors are getting cold feet in front of the entire country and second-guessing whether they even want to go to trial. They said impeachment was so urgent that it could not even wait for due process, but now they're content to sit on their hands. This is really comical. Democrats' own actions concede that their allegations are unproven. The articles aren't just unproven, they're also constitutionally incoherent. Frankly, if either of these articles is blessed by the Senate, we could easily see the impeachment of every future president of either party. Let me say that again. If the Senate blesses this historically low bar, we will invite the impeachment of every future president. The House Democrats' allegations, as presented, are incompatible with our constitutional order. They're unlike anything that has ever been seen in 230 years of this republic. House Democrats want to create new rules for this president because they feel uniquely enraged. Uniquely enraged. But long after the partisan fever of this moment has broken, the institutional damage will remain. I've described the threat to the presidency. This also imperils the Senate itself. The House has created an unfair, unfinished product that looks nothing like any impeachment inquiry in American history. And if the Speaker ever gets her House in order, that mess will be dumped over here on the Senate's lap. If the Senate blesses this slapdash impeachment, if we say that from now on, this is enough, then we invite an endless parade of impeachable trials. Future Houses of either party will feel free to toss up a jump ball every time they feel angry, free to swamp the Senate with trial after trial, no matter how baseless the charges. We'd be giving future Houses of either party unbelievable new power to paralyze the Senate at their whim. More thin arguments, more incomplete evidence, more partisan impeachments. In fact, Mr. President, this same House of Representatives has already indicated that they themselves may not be finished impeaching. The House Judiciary Committee told a federal court this very week that it will continue its impeachment investigation even after voting on these articles. And multiple Democratic members have already called publicly for more. If the Senate blesses this, if the nation accepts this, presidential impeachments may cease being a once-in-a-generation event and become a constant part of the political background noise. This extraordinary tool of last resort may become just another part of the arms race of polarization. Real statesmen would have recognized, no matter their view of this president, that trying to remove him on this thin and partisan basis could unsettle the foundations of our republic. Real statesmen would have recognized, no matter how much partisan animosity might be coursing through their veins, that cheapening the impeachment process was not the answer. Historians will regard this as a great irony of our era, that so many who profess such concern for our norms and traditions themselves proved willing to trample our constitutional order to get their way. It is long past time for Washington to get a little perspective. President Trump is not the first president with a populist streak, not the first to make entrenched elites uncomfortable. He's certainly not the first president to speak bluntly, to mistrust the administrative state, or to rankle unelected bureaucrats. And heaven knows he's not the first president to assert the constitutional privileges of his office rather than roll over when Congress demands unlimited, sensitive information. None of these things, none of them, is unprecedented. I'll tell you what would be unprecedented. It will be an unprecedented constitutional crisis if the Senate literally hands the House of Representatives a new partisan vote of no confidence that the founders intentionally withheld, destroying the independence of the presidency. It will be unprecedented if we agree that any future House that dislikes any future president can rush through an unfair inquiry, skip the legal system, and paralyze the Senate with a trial. The House could do that at will under this precedent. It will be unprecedented if the Senate says second-hand and third-hand testimony from unelected civil service servants is enough to overturn the people's vote. It will be an unprecedented constitutional crisis if the Senate agrees to set the bar this low forever. It is clear what this moment requires. It requires the Senate to fulfill our founding purpose. The framers built the Senate to provide stability, to take the long view of our republic, to safeguard institutions from the momentary hysteria that sometimes consumes our politics, to keep partisan passions from literally boiling over. The Senate exists for moments like this. That's why this body has the ultimate say in impeachments. The framers knew the House would be too vulnerable to transient passions and violent factionalism. They needed a body that would consider legal questions about what has been proven and political questions about what the common good of our nation requires. Hamilton said explicitly in Federalist 65 that impeachment involves not just legal questions, but inherently political judgments about what outcome best serves the nation. The House can't do both. The courts can't do both. This is as grave an assignment as the Constitution gives to any branch of government, and the framers knew only the Senate could handle it. Well, the moment the framers feared has arrived. A political faction in the lower chamber have succumbed to partisan rage. A political faction in the House of Representatives has succumbed to a partisan rage. They have fulfilled Hamilton's philosophy that impeachment will, quote, connect itself with the pre-existing factions, enlist all their animosities, and there will always be the greatest danger that the decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt. Alexander Hamilton. That's what happened in the House last night. The vote did not reflect what had been proven. It only reflects how they feel about the president. The Senate must put this right. We must rise to the occasion. There's only one outcome that is suited to the paucity of evidence, the failed inquiry, the slapdash case. Only one outcome suited to the fact that the accusations themselves are constitutionally incoherent. Constitutionally incoherent. Only one outcome will preserve core precedents rather than smash them into bits in a fit of partisan rage because one party still cannot accept the American people's choice in 2016. It could not be clearer which outcome would serve the stabilizing, institution-preserving, fever-breaking role for which the United States Senate was created, and which outcome would betray it. The Senate's duty is clear. The Senate's duty is clear. When the time comes, we must fulfill it.